Maree is leading the Climate Smart Recovery campaign. So she's going to talk us through 3 slides, and then I'll talk you through 3 slides. And then Peter will talk you through the 3 slides for his campaign. So that way you'll get a sense of what the 3 campaigns are from the people who are kind of leading each campaign. So here we go, Maree. And Maree, just tell me when to move on to the next slide, or to move to the next words.
How about I unmute myself as a good start?
Great start.
So, hi everyone. My name is Maree Nutt. I live on Guringai country, and it's also the electorate of Mackellar, up on Sydney's northern beaches, with Jason Falinski as my MP. Just as a little bit of background, I've only been involved in CCL quite actively for the last 6 months, although I would say it's been in my peripheral vision for a few years. I was prompted to act and take my first action during the bushfire crisis, when I read one of Rod's compelling emails and decided it was actually time that I wrote a letter to my MP on this issue. But I come from a long background of grassroots advocacy in the sister organisation of CCL Results, which does grassroots advocacy on global poverty. So that's just a little bit of background on me, but I'm delighted to be able to speak to you and be part of the political strategy team that has put these 3 campaigns together. And so the first campaign, as it says there on the slide, is the Climate Smart Recovery campaign. And I was listening to a conversation that Christiana Figueres was part of. I'm sure that people know that she was really the reason why the Paris climate negotiations in 2015 actually was successful, as opposed to the predecessor negotiations. So she comes with quite a lot of authority, and she talked about this phase that we're in at the moment. Phase is quite an understatement of a word, but the crisis that we're in at the moment, the pandemic, as we move through the health crisis into the economic crisis. She described really that we're experiencing such tumultuous change in our economies around the world, and she recognized it as even a breakdown of our economies. But through this breakdown of the old economy, have this opportunity to build a new economy. And what I loved about what she said was the analogy of a very tall and old tree in a forest that eventually falls down. And when it falls down, what it does, it creates light, and it creates opportunities for new growth. And I thought that was a really, really great analogy for us to be having in our mind when we're thinking about the crisis that we're currently in with the pandemic. Because at the very beginning, I remember seeing things like stories of people who lived in the foothills of the Himalayas who had never been able to see the actual peaks of the Himalaya mountains until the air pollution reduced by the lockdowns that we were having. So, it's been such a change for us, and it was really a good opportunity for us to look at how the physical world is changing at the moment, but also our political world. And when we look at the political world in Australia, we have governments doing things that they themselves admit they would never have dreamed of doing in the world as we knew it. And this has created a lot of opportunity for us to be now creating that light and building that new growth and that new opportunity. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about a climate smart recovery, because we think that this is actually a great opportunity for us to bring the issue of climate change much higher into the focus of our politicians. So I think we will all agree that despite the situation that we're currently in with some bumps in the road in our recovery, and there's a significant bump in Victoria at the moment, that Australia has been recognised as a global leader, not only in its health response, but also in its economic response to this crisis. And the question is, and I'm sure people have sort of recognised this themselves, how did we get to be recognised as a global leader? And I think one of the key things was the formation of the National Cabinet, which particularly in the early days was really striking in its fast-acting, collaborative, collegiate and bipartisan actions that we saw from that National Cabinet. So we also saw a huge amount and continue to see a huge amount of money invested in an economic stimulus, which was passed through Parliament in record time through bipartisanship. And we've seen tough decisions being made, always tough decisions being made with the health experts by the side of the politicians, the health experts, the scientists, the epidemiologists, the leading business and trade union leaders, all making these very tough decisions in collaboration. It's not been perfect, and I think we've seen some of the imperfections as time has gone on, but it's really been a change in the way business is done down in Canberra. And it's those principles that we really want to take into addressing the bigger crisis of climate change. Rod, I'm not looking at the screen at the moment. I'm looking at a couple of notes on my PowerPoint, so I have no idea what you're clicking and not clicking. So, yes, perfect.
I'm syncing with you fine, yeah.
Perfect. All right, let me go back to my little bit of notes. So, I remember the first meeting that I had with an MP as a CCL volunteer, and the first thing we did was say, thank you for the swift action, the bipartisanship, the investment in JobSeeker and JobKeeper. These are really great things, and thank you for taking so much notice and so much advice from the experts on health. And these are the things that we want to see from all sides of politics in addressing climate change. So, Rod, are you on the next slide? So,
yes.
Yeah, so it's important for us to, as volunteers in Citizens Climate Lobby, we can use this kind of narrative when we're talking to our friends and family. We can use this kind of narrative when we're talking to parliamentarians, and we can use this narrative if we're, as I am, particularly interested in writing letters to the editor on these issues. But it's important that we convey to all of those audiences that this is a great opportunity for the stimulus that we're putting so much money into to be used to not just rebuild the economy, but also to help address the issue of climate change and help to reduce our carbon emissions much more dramatically than the path that we have been on in recent years. So it is a great opportunity, and it's one that we should be making the most of as an advocacy organisation like Citizens Climate Lobby. We also should not be going in there without being realistic about some of the risks. And I think this week particularly we've seen that, there are moments where in terms of fast-tracking infrastructure projects, for example, there is a risk that some of the green tape will be bypassed or not given the appropriate level of focus that it requires. So it's very important for us to make sure that the balance is right for investment in things like infrastructure, but without jeopardizing elements of our environment that could be worsened by these types of projects. And of course, you know, the other thing is that, you know, when I remember talking to one of the MPs and very early on in the pandemic, and she was particularly enthusiastic about retrofitting buildings and putting solar panels on apartment blocks and many other programs around recycling and transitioning to renewable energy. And I think it's very important that we continue to stay true to our main objective and the role of carbon pricing in all of this, how this can be a great accelerator of all of these things that we're promoting, because the reality is that the health and environmental cost of fossil fuels are not included in their price, and effectively they are a subsidy. So we need to get the balance appropriate again. One of the things that this picture talks about in this slide, the Million Jobs Plan from Beyond Zero Emissions. I mean, what a great project this is. The potential to stimulate the economy with 1 million jobs, which will at the same time make significant impact on our carbon emissions. And we're very fortunate to have the principal researcher from Beyond Zero Emissions as the guest speaker on our call Sunday week, the 2nd of August. So that should be a really great opportunity to hear about a very real example of a climate smart recovery project that we can get behind. I think we're on to our last slide now. Rod? I remember when I saw this cartoon first off, I think that George had it as a promo from one of his Sydney talks, and I started doing some digging around this cartoon. It's actually from a Canadian cartoonist. I can't read his name right at the moment, Mackay, I think. And anyway, he's evolved that cartoon over the last few months, and it has been reproduced in dozens of languages all around the world. And I think it really spells out that whilst we can hardly believe the crisis that we're in at the moment in terms of the health crisis, the economic crisis, the climate change crisis is going to make these two more look like a warm-up match, really. So it's really imperative that we do a range of things as advocates, and we've put together a range of resources for this campaign, which we'll unveil a little bit more on Sunday. But writing to our parliamentarians about this with some specific requests about how to use the successful approaches that we have at the moment in addressing the economic crisis and the climate change crisis simultaneously. So we'll be asking people to write letters, to go and visit with their parliamentarians. We'll help people to write articles and letters to newspapers to support CCL's social media campaigns. And we'd really love to hear everybody's ideas about other things that we can do, because we really are an organisation that is about creating a livable world for everybody, and this crisis that we're in at the moment is really about using the opportunities that are available to us to make that livable world a reality. I think I should well and truly stop there, Rod.
Thank you, Maree. That was very, very rich in detail. It was beautiful. So thank you for all of that. Moving on to the second campaign is quite simply building the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, which some of you may have heard of, but you'll hear about it a bit more. The key thing here is that carbon pricing, we know, is an effective, essential, and some people would say an inevitable tool to bring about a livable world and to reverse climate change. And yet, unfortunately, it has been viciously weaponized and used very effectively as an electoral tool as a tool to win elections. It's been abolished in Australia, and to a large degree, it's been forgotten. And even many other members of the climate movement don't even think about carbon pricing anymore as an option. However, we're very clear that it's still a very, very important tool, and in many ways, it's kind of ripe for revival. Rehabilitation time for carbon pricing is how I'm seeing it at the moment. And the key tool to doing this is the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, which was formed just before the Paris COP21, and it brought together organisations, it brought together governments, businesses, industries, and academia and civil society in a coalition to really push for carbon pricing as an important tool for reversing climate change. Since then, they've done some really good work in other places, but they've been there's been very little activity in Australia, even though there are 11 partners in the coalition. So in order to restore carbon pricing and to revive it, a broad coalition is really needed. Business and industry are really, really important players, and it's wonderful that they are stepping up more and more at the moment. They're speaking more clearly about the need for carbon pricing. Many of them are pricing carbon internally as a way of preparing themselves for what's coming, and also to make their businesses more low carbon in activity. And we also need governments, and not just federal governments, but state governments and local governments are really important as well. Academia is another really important source of input to the coalition, and civil society. So internationally, there are about 300 members and partners, and some of them are governments, some of them are whole universities, and some of them are just schools within universities. And of course, CCL International was a member of the coalition right from the start. It's also important to acknowledge the UN and the IMF and the World Bank. The World Bank is actually provides the secretariat for the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition in Washington, DC, and they have 5 staff there, and they sort of coordinate the whole process and help with the coalition building in various parts of the world. And bringing all of those things together creates the sort of coalition power that can make all the difference to push the to create the tipping point, I guess, that enables us to move from where we are now to a broad acceptance of carbon pricing. So where does this leave us in terms of how can we contribute to this, and how can our individual members and volunteers do so? Well, the first thing is to join a Grasstops action team. And so we have a national action team that is putting together this campaign, but it's just as important to have members at the local level in our local groups and local chapters. And remember, the grass tops is one of the 5 levers that we use to create the political will for climate solutions. So local grass tops teams are really important to reaching out to local community leaders, to chambers of industry, to local businesses and so on, to get them on side. That's really important. Reaching out to, so what we want to do is to reach out to potential partners. So the Grass Tops Action Team at both levels will be doing that. And what we do is we ask for an endorsement of carbon pricing, preferably an endorsement of carbon fee and dividend if they're willing to do that. And then we would like some of them to become partners in CPLC as well. Important that we tell our MPs about the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition and how important it is and what a difference it's made in other parts of the world, particularly Canada. And there's another story to that which I won't tell now. But CPLC and CCL work together quite well to create the carbon price that's now in existence in Canada. And telling the national media, of course, and to a lesser extent the local media, but it's important that the national media gets to hear about the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition over the next few months as we build. So that's the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition. It's one of the 3 campaigns, and I'll now pass on to Peter to tell us about building the centre.
Okay, the Building the Centre campaign. Yeah, so for Australia to achieve zero net greenhouse gas emissions, it's going to require a kind of integrated and focused effort over the next 20 to 30 years to achieve what we really need to achieve. And it becomes very difficult if there's periods of low ambition or flip-flop in climate policies when government changes. There's countries like Britain and a number of the countries in Europe, there's no climate wars. There's a bipartisan agreement between the key political parties on climate policies and common goals and a common focus. So the Building the Centre campaign is to try to move Australia in that direction. Over the last kind of 6 to 12 months, we have been making progress. So we've had kind of the coalitions dropping of their use of Kyoto credits, putting a plan with their investment roadmap to actually say they will achieve. Not everyone agrees that it's a sensible plan to get to our Paris targets, but at least they believe that they can now achieve the Paris targets with their plan in place. Also, there's been activities like Anthony Albanese's offer to Scott Morrison to have discussions to have a common renewable energy agreements. So to have an agreement of the key focus around the migration to renewable energy. So it just becomes very important so that we build a common bipartisanship in the centre of politics between coalition Labor and the key independents, so that we can get this common focus long-term in Australia. So the Building the Centre campaign in some ways integrates and extends the Climate Smart Recovery campaign. As we've heard from Maree, it is a key focus, and the Building the Centre campaign will extend that work that Maree's doing, especially across groups. So the focus will be a lot around centrist MPs. So MPs that are more moderate and are much more likely to wish to come together and achieve bipartisanship on our climate direction. One of the organisations that Citizens Climate Lobby support strongly is the Parliamentary Friends of Climate Action. So that's an organisation where it's a non-partisan organisation where members of both sides of the federal parliament come together and discuss climate issues. So we would like to encourage more MPs to join that Parliamentary Friends group so that they can get a common focus, can develop a common focus on how we tackle our climate challenges. So that group's organised by Rebecca, the Free Independents, Rebecca Sharkey, Zali Stegel, and Helen Haynes. So we're also looking at state politics, because especially with the COVID crisis and the national cabinet is put a lot of focus on what the states can achieve. All states in Australia, effectively one way or the other, support a zero net emissions by 2050. So the more interaction between states focus on the climate and the federal focus on the climate will support that. So a big focus of the Build the Centre campaign is focusing on building groups, especially where MPs are more moderate and are more likely to support bipartisan action. So, and getting lobbying starting with those MPs. So lobbying MPs is one of the key levers that CCL has to influence what happens. So the Building the Centre campaign tries to extend our influence across a range of MPs. We'd also like to link up with other organisations that would also support bipartisanship and building the centre. So we've got organisations like the Blueprint think tank, Beyond Zero Emissions, the Climate Councils, and a number of others. So what we'd like to is build stronger links to those organisations, because there's always strength in numbers. So the question is, what can we do? So we'd like to encourage people to join the Build the Centre outreach teams, who will try to engage CCL members, especially in electorates where the MP is a little bit more centrist, a little bit more likely to support bipartisanship, and support members to meet those MPs and make the key asks that support some of these changes. And so the outreach team will assist the growth of more local groups especially in those specific electorates. And we'd also like to get people who might be interested in connecting with other centrist organisations, either joining those organisations as well as being a part of CCL, or at least connecting with those organisations, and especially connecting with the key individuals in those organisations, so we can build those stronger bonds, and so we can build a much more wider focus on how we drive our politicians to accept climate solutions, and how we can promote that to the Australian public, because on all these things we've got to bring the Australian public with us in our kind of key goal of creating a livable world.
Thank you very much, Peter. And just to finish that section, I'm just going to show you a very brief video, which comes from CCL in the USA. Where they've put forward the Far Middle campaign as a way of promoting and basically building the centre, the same as what we're doing. So I'll just show you this brief video clip. It's rather fun.
Welcome to the far middle, that delightful headspace between the far left
Namaste.
and the far right.
Howdy.
We like ideas from both sides of the aisle here and realize that when we hurt the other side, we're really just hurting ourselves.
But when we hurt ourselves, we're also hurting the other side.
Ow! It's only when we stop trying to hurt each other that we can solve big issues, like climate change. Right, guys?
I mean, I don't know about that.
I wouldn't say that at all. I'd say something else completely.
Here in the far middle, we support a climate change solution called the Energy Innovation Act. It's a national policy that addresses climate change without growing the size of government or destroying our modern economy. Let me explain.
Nice one.
That was clearly your fault.
Okay, here we
It
go.
was on your side.
My side's
Your
doing just
side
fine
did it.
over here.
Take 3. Let me explain. Fossil fuels are taxed at the source for every ton of CO2 they put into the air. Energy companies can still do business. They just have to pay a fee if they pollute the air because, well, we all breathe it. The collected money is split up and distributed to every American taxpayer, not the government.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, that actually makes sense.
So we all agree then?
No.
The money comes as a monthly check you can use to compensate for higher energy prices or use to invest in clean energy, which doesn't get carbon taxed. With clean energy on an equal playing field, the American free market gets kicked into an innovation frenzy to see who can create the cheapest, cleanest energy to get your business first. We literally can't even imagine what cool tech will pop up because it hasn't been invented yet.
Cool.
And some pretty big hitters support the idea of putting a price on carbon. 27 Nobel Prize-winning economists, literally all living ex-Federal Reserve chairs, and over 3,500 other economists from across the country.
Even oil companies like it.
And like a gazillion nonprofits. This is great.
I agree.
Aw, bring it in, guys! The thing is, we need your help letting Congress know climate change isn't a far left or a far right issue. Visit farmiddle.com to let Congress know that the far middle is alive and well, and that we want them to start working together, shoulder to shoulder, on climate. Go on, save the world. I'll take care of them.
So that's rather fun, isn't it? And kind of illustrates the building the center idea very well in an American sort of way. But anyway, so that's the 3 campaigns.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we at CCL Australia are doing, please subscribe to our channel by hitting the button in the top left corner of the screen. Then spread the word by using the share icon to as many of your contacts as possible.